Wells of Silence by TheBeckster, Chapter 13, 30 Weeks. Anakin huffed in frustration as she struggled to wrap her tunic around her waist. It fit and closed, but just barely. She scowled at herself in the mirror, her fingers tracing the gaps in the fabric where her undershirt peeked through. Her outer robe would cover this. It wouldn't be a problem today, but she would have to find the larger robes again. This was the third time in 2 months. These kids were growing faster than she saw it. She hadn't had to go for new robes this often since she hit a growth spurt at 14. She grew 6 inches in 4 weeks and hadn't stopped there. The acolytes had begun a betting pool on how tall she'd get before she stopped growing. This time around there was significantly less joking and betting. Anakin sighed as she pulled her robe on. At least she wouldn't have to worry about growing out of this. She checked the chrono as she hooked her lightsaber to the inside of her robe. She had long since given up on belts, wondering if it would be better to get new clothes now or later that night. The Chancellor wasn't expecting her for another hour. She might as well get this over with. Padme tried very hard not to laugh at his wife, growled into his office. He did manage to turn it into a breathy cough. Anakin didn't fall for it. She stalked over to his couch and plopped down with a huff. Go ahead and say it. I know I look ridiculous. Oh, honey, it's not that bad, Padme said gently as he sat next to Anakin. Anakin shot her husband a skeptical look. Really? She stood up, shrugged out of her outer robe, and stood facing Padme with her arms spread wide. The sleeves were enormous, falling far past her hands. The hem nearly fell past her knees, and the robes bagged and sagged everywhere. Anakin was swimming in light brown fabric. Well, Padme mused for a moment, trying to find a positive spin for this. At least nobody can see your bump anymore. No, now it just looks like I'm actually trying to hide something. People were giving me weird looks all morning. Anakin let her arms fall to her side as she sat back down. Who would those robes even fit? I think the Wookiee robes, very tall Wookiee robes. Really? At the rate I'm going, I'll have grown out of all the human-sized robes in another week or two, so... She shrugged and held her arms out again. I decided to go ahead a few steps. Will you please just let me buy you some new clothes, Annie? You look miserable. What's the point, Padme? A few more months and I won't even need them again. You'll be more comfortable, and I know a designer who does ensembles for almost everyone in the Senate. He's very good, very discreet, and he owes me a favor. Anakin shot her husband an incredulous look. I don't think I need to wear anything as fancy as you do. He can work in simpler styles, something that would look right at home in a Jedi's wardrobe. Besides, he always loves a challenge. Anakin looked unconvinced. Anakin still looked unconvinced. But how would I explain the new wardrobe to anyone at the temple? Padme smirked. I doubt anyone would ask, other than Obi-Wan perhaps. You can just tell him I took pity on your poor, drowning in Wookiee robe soul and bought you some new clothes as a gift. I doubt he'd find anything suspicious about that. Anakin looked down at her voluminous robes and half smiled. All right, you win. When can you set up a meeting? As luck would have it, I have an appointment with him this evening. Come home around 6 and we'll get you taken care of. Oh, it's luck, huh? Anakin smirked at Padme. Padme placed his hand over his heart. On my honor, it's pure coincidence, he swore. I've had this appointment booked for months. Anakin chuckled and leaned against Padme. I'm beginning to suspect you're secretly force sensitive. That kind of foresight's too convenient to be a coincidence. Maybe I picked something up from you. I wish I could just stay here for the rest of the day and not have to deal with people seeing me like this. Anakin sighed. Do you have a meeting? At the temple in half an hour. Well, I have some pins in my desk. Give me 15 minutes and I should be able to come up with something that'll get you through the day. Anakin found herself feeling unexpectedly nervous as she rode the lift up to Padme's apartment. Her earlier interest in meeting this designer had waned as the day passed, gradually being replaced by apprehension. She knew Padme trusted this designer, but could he be trusted to keep his mouth shut? If he really did work with most of the Senate, there was no knowing how he could take her secret too. The elevator sped higher and higher. Anakin briefly considered not getting off the lift, letting it take her back down to the entrance and coming back in a few hours. She could easily apologize to Padme later for missing the appointment. After all, in the middle of a war, urgent business could come up at any time. Before she could commit to turning tail, the elevator slowed to a smooth stop, the doors whisked open, and Anakin made eye contact with the security officer standing guard outside Padme's apartment. Knight Skywalker. She greeted Anakin with a genial smile. Her eyes scanned Anakin, no doubt taking note of her odd, loose clothing. The senator said you would be visiting tonight. Go on ahead. Go on through. Anakin muttered a quick thanks and walked past the security station. The front door was within sight of the guard. It was too late to turn back now. Taking a breath, she pressed the entry chime. She could sense Padme in the apartment, back in his dressing room with another presence, the designer, she assumed. The door opened almost immediately, and C-3PO stood there, ready to greet her. Oh, Mistress Anakin, what a pleasure it is to see you again. The droid commented brightly, stepping aside to let Anakin enter. Master Padme said you would be visiting this evening. He is in his dressing room. Shall I escort you? No, thank you, 3PO, Anakin said, smiling at her droid. I know the way. The droid bowed stiffly and shuffled off toward the kitchen, no doubt to put together some refreshments. As Anakin approached the room, she heard the murmur of conversation. Padme's voice bantered back and forth with another. As she entered, both Padme and the designer were facing away from her. Padme was in a half-assembled jacket made of a rich, deep blue material. He held his arms out as the designer fused with the sleeves. The designer was a volupte, tall and thin, with golden skin and lavender stripes showing on his 4 bare arms. Anakin cleared her throat. Both Padme and the volupte turned around. The designer reaction was immediate. He gasped softly, his 4 eyes wide, and a look of horror passed over his face. Oh my, you were right to call me Padme, he said, grasping Padme's forearm with one hand. Anakin, Padme stepped forward, smiling brightly. I'm glad you made it. He took Anakin's arm and led her farther into the room. This is Stav, my friend. I was telling you about. We've known each other for how long has it been, Stav? Longer than I care to admit. The Volapy laughed. He stepped forward and shook Anakin's hand. When Padme told me he had a Jedi friend in need of my expertise, I was skeptical. Jedi fashion isn't exactly changed much in the last 500,000 years. But now I can see this is a true emergency. Even as he shook her hand, Anakin felt him tugging at her robes with his 3 free hands, studying them intently with one set of eyes. That's why I asked for your help, Stav. You're the best, Padme interjected, gently detaching Stav's hands from Anakin by leading him back into the middle of the room. And this is what it looks like after I spent 20 minutes fixing it this afternoon. Padme winked back at his wife as Stav resumed his work on his sleeves. Anakin relaxed a bit. Padme was completely at ease, as was the designer. She took a seat and waited quietly as Stav finished his adjustments. When the Volapy declared he was finished, he allowed Padme to turn to a full-length mirror. Padme took a minute to look at the jacket from all angles. Stav, it's wonderful, as always. I know. Stav helped Padme slip out of the jacket, taking care of not jostle any pins or smudge any pencil marks. I should have the final alterations done the day after tomorrow. Padme thanked his friend and stepped aside. Stav carefully folded the jacket over the top of the pile of other garments that he had already measured for Padme. Then he turned to Anakin with a sharp eye. All right, go ahead and disrobe. Let me see what I'm working with here. Anakin stood up, pulled off her outer robe, but hesitated with the Wookiee-sized tunic. Was she really about to just show the stranger her biggest secret? Darling, no need to be shy. Once you've seen one human in their undergarments, you've seen them all. The Volapy offered with a smile. Anakin breathed a laugh and moved to pull her tunic off. She was met with resistance. I think I'm pinned in here. Oh, here. Let me help. Padme offered instantly. He stepped forward and began undoing his earlier work. It'll be okay, Annie. You can trust Stav, he whispered encouragingly to his wife. As soon as the final pin was taken out, the loose robes practically fell off Anakin's shoulders. Not bothering to waste any more time on her anxieties, Anakin just shrugged out of her tunic. Watching the designer carefully, she stood there for a moment in silence in her pants and boots and tight undershirt. Nothing was concealed. Stav's lower eyes widened a bit. Well, that explains it. I know the Jedi tend to opt for drab and boring when it comes to their clothing, but horrendously oversized isn't one of their encouraged fashions. He stepped forward with a tape measure and began taking Anakin's measurements. One set of arms measured, the other took notes. You seem unsurprised. Anakin was a little confused as the Volapy began manipulating her arms. Stav scoffed, resting his lower set of hands on his hips. As if a pregnant Jedi is the most scandalous thing I've been asked to hide. Please, when you've been in this business as long as I have, nothing comes as a surprise anymore. He returned to his measurements, moving, positioning, and repositioning Anakin as he needed. Besides, the whole purpose of clothing is to hide something, is it not? Whether for modesty's sake or to keep a secret, clothing is for concealing. Stav finished his measurement and gave Anakin a roguish nudge with his elbow. You should see what the Chancellor keeps under his robes. This piqued Anakin's interest, reminding her that she was supposed to be spying on Palpatine for the Order. And what is our Chancellor hiding under his robes? She asked, not expecting a real response, but a hint could go far. Stav chuckled. Nothing that would be of interest to a Jedi, I'm sure. You never know, Padme chimed in. Anakin's been working quite closely with the Chancellor lately. Padme, I am astonished with you. Stav gasped, placing all 4 hands on his hips. You know my policy. I don't gossip about my other clients. He shook an unconvincingly reprimanding finger at the senator. Padme rolled his eyes but smiled. Keep it up and I might accidentally let it slip. Something about what you keep tucked in your jackets. Stav finished with a smirk, turning back to his work. That interests Anakin more. She raised her eyebrow at her husband and asked, What does Senator Anidala keep tucked in his jackets? Padme heaved an overdramatic sigh and walked over to the jacket he had been wearing earlier that day. It had been laid aside on another chair. Padme picked it up and reached inside, drawing something from a fold in the linen. Anakin recognized the silver glint almost immediately. The blaster was small Nubian model, easily concealable, lightweight and compact. She knew it delivered a powerful kick for its size. Personal weapons were discouraged in the Senate building, really only allowed for guards and security staff. How long had Padme been carrying that? It's for self-defense, Padme explained. After Bane held us hostage, I didn't want to be defenseless ever again. A wise decision, Anakin commented with a nod. She still wasn't sure how she had never noticed. It wasn't like she hadn't handled Padme's jackets before. Then again, usually when she was handling Padme's clothing, she was in the process of removing it and quite preoccupied otherwise. Can you take off your boots? Stav asked, finishing his measurements. That's not gonna happen. Once they're off, they don't go back on. Swollen ankles? You have no idea. The designer nodded. Not a problem, I can work around that. He stepped back and looked Anakin up and down. How far along are you? 7.5 months? Really? I would have pegged you for later. No matter, you'll just need more room to grow. I'll tell you now, judging by your shape, there will come a point in time where even my skills won't be able to hide you. I know, I just need something to get me through these last couple months. The key is long, dark layers. Now, I have seen Jedi wearing long robes and dresses before. No dresses, Anakin insisted immediately. Can't fight as well in a dress. One would hope you're not fighting at all, given your condition. It's a hazard of the job, and it's not like I can just run around flaunting this. She gestured to her stomach. Fair enough. I should be able to post together a few tops that will suit you just fine. It might take a few days. Padme, dear. He half turned and spoke over his shoulder. Your jacket might be delayed by a day or two. I don't mind waiting, Stav. Anakin's clothes are more of a priority than mine, Padme said with a gentle smile. Amidala, you have a heart of gold, and I don't know where you get it from. You are easily my least fussy client, Stav commented, walking over to pick up Anakin's oversized tunic. I have good friends who keep me in check, Padme smiled at his wife. Jedi set the bar pretty high. Anakin chuckled, though it wasn't because she agreed with Padme's statement. Between the two of them, her husband most certainly stood on higher moral ground than she did. Right, well, in the meantime, I should be able to turn this into something functional for you, Skywalker, Stav commented, holding the Wookiee tunic out at arm's length. He pulled out a wry face looking between it and Anakin. At least until I've completed your other pieces. Anakin let Stav move her again while he refitted the tunic. She was glad she had decided to come. Despite her earlier reservations, Stav put her at ease. Padme was happy, and her secret would be secured for a little while longer. After Stav had finished all his measurements and alterations and had miraculously reworked the Wookiee tunic into something actually wearable, Anakin and Padme were cuddled up together on the couch. The holonet was on, but neither was really paying attention. The twins were being particularly active, and Padme was fully engrossed in feeling his children kick his hands. Anakin was enjoying the moment, really, but she was also really uncomfortable. It was the usual end of the day crash. Her head was beginning to ache. Her back and feet hurt, and one of the twins kept kicking her ribs. On top of it all, her unquenchable craving for a ruby bile had come back with a vengeance. She hadn't had or wanted one since she was a kid on Tatooine. They weren't even that tasty. Just some sugary, syrupy, cold treat the slave kids could afford every once in a while. But dang it, she was this close to flying all the way out to Tatooine just to get her hands on one. Padme looked at her with concern. You've got that irritated, scrunched look on your face, Annie. What's wrong? Anakin sighed but brushed away his concern. Nothing, just an annoying craving. Oh, that drink? What was it called? Sapphire something? Anakin smiled and tucked her head into the crook of Padme's neck. Her hands absently traced the spots where the twins were still moving. Ruby bile. Padme hummed. That's right. Are you thirsty? I can go get you a drink. Anakin shrugged. Sure, I could use some water. Padme disentangled himself from their intertwined limbs and left for the kitchen. Anakin turned her attention to the holonet in his absence. Some overacted holodrama she had never heard of before. After a minute, Padme was back with her drink. He presented it to her on a tray. Anakin didn't quite understand why he thought a glass of water deserved such treatment. But you didn't, Anakin gasped, grabbing the frosty glass. Padme beamed at her and sat down. I looked everywhere for this. Apparently Coruscant has exactly one vendor who makes and sells them. I stocked up, just in case. Anakin thought she might cry tears of joy as she took her first sip of the ruby bile. It tasted exactly like she remembered it. Very sugary, but with an unmistakable yet unidentifiable flavor. You are officially the best husband, Anakin decreed. She gave Padme a thank you kiss to prove it. Padme settled back against his wife, tucking her under his arm while she sipped her drink. I'm pretty sure it's written somewhere in galactic law or something that a father is responsible for fixing the cravings. Anakin hummed happily, taking a sip. Well, if it isn't, it should be. She chuckled and nudged her husband. The first thing you should do once the war is over is make that law. Padme nuzzled his wife's neck, just content to see her so happy. I'll look into it. End of chapter.